In fact, you cannot divide them into authentic and non-authentic. There are different levels of authenticity. And some of the authentic narrations contradict with other authentic narrations. And therefore, you have to deal with the contradiction by saying that one of the narrators made a mistake. As simple as that. And I know that it's very difficult for us to swallow after all the glorification that we gave in our Islamic education for Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. And they are great Imams. Imam Bukhari was a genius, and he collected the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in a way that is genius. But in Bukhari, there are contradictions. There are ahadith, there are narrations that imply contradictory things. And there is no way to gather them. It's the numbers. Let me open one of the issues. Okay, Hadith Aisha, and that perhaps I'm giving a detail in this Hadith to explain to you the Aam wal Khas and the Sunnah and where it's yes.
I'm puzzled in understanding that there is Sharia, which, except for the introductory verses, is directly the Word of God. And there's speak. My problem is it possible to encounter Sharia without using
Well, that is a very good question, and that relates to the example I wanted to give my brother. That no, we cannot reach the Sharia with 100% certainty. But the closer we get to the essence of the Sharia with our fiqh, the closer fiqh comes to the Sharia. And how do we know that? There are a number of ways. One of them, they call it the consensus of the scholars, or the consensus, I believe the consensus of the nation, of the ummah, of Muslims. So every Muslim, young or old, knows that we pray, let's say, 5 times a day. If you read the Quran and you can say, well, he talked about prayers, but he didn't say 5. He didn't say the word 5. But our consensus as Muslims, and especially with the Sunnah, with the Hadith, we know that we pray 5 times a day. So the closer everybody agrees to something, the closer we could get to the Sharia. But I could never claim that my opinion is Sharia. My opinion at the end is fiqh. But there are different levels of fiqh. There are some levels in which I am sure I am meeting the objective of the Sharia and the letter of the Quran, and I am sure that we have to slaughter the animal this way, and because this is clear in the Quran.
One more
question. Sure.
You have emphasized that we need to ask the why.
Mm-hmm.
Is that identical with Kalam, which a number of schools of Islam reject? One should not be involved in Kalam.
Well, Kalam is the philosophy of religion in Islam. So the philosophical issues of the faith. And you have different schools based on the questions they asked. Whether God, when he talks about his hand or his eye, whether he has an eye or not, these kinds of questions, philosophical questions. When he talks about the hellfire, whether the hellfire has an end or it is, endless, and there is nothing endless but him. How can fire be endless, or what? These kinds of questions. Some concern of some scholars, because of the Maqasid approach, they are concerned that we're going to get into philosophy. And if we transform Islam into philosophy, we will lose some of the aspects of Islam. Kalam is different. Kalam is the philosophy of the faith. But they don't want to get into philosophy because they feel that they could lose some of the basic premises of the faith. I'm not with that opinion. I take the opinion of Averroes or Ibn Rushd, one of the great scholars of Islam. In fact, I wrote a book on his book in Fiqh, Bidayat al-Mujtahid. And Averroes believed that philosophy is what the Quran is requiring us to do. and that any philosophical inquiry, as long as it doesn't contradict with the oneness of God and so on, is a valid inquiry. And he was very open-minded in his book, The Decisive Argument. It's in English. If you read The Decisive Argument, it's called The Decisive Argument on the link between philosophy and Sharia. And he is saying that any philosophical approach to the Sharia is a valid approach. Versus Al-Ghazali, a contemporary of his, or a few years before him, who said that any philosophical approach to the Sharia is a wrong approach, and you have to take the letter. So I hope this. Now, the example I wanted to give my brother about the Sunnah, about the Prophet's Hadith, and the contradictions. Sometimes there is a contradiction in Bukhari himself. Take the Hadith of Aisha, radiallahu anha, when she said that the Prophet ﷺ married me when I was 9, in Bukhari. And take the same hadith of Aisha in Bukhari when she said that I grew up seeing my parents practice Islam. ما عقلت إلا وأبواي دينان الدين. And the Prophet used to come to our place day and night. وكان الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم يأتينا بكرة وعشية. One day, it was a very bad trial on Muslims. حتى إذا ابتلي الناس, Abu Bakr decided to migrate to Abyssinia with the migrants. Aisha is saying, Abu Bakr decided to immigrate with the migrants to Abyssinia. And he went out on the road, and a person saw him, and he had this discussion, so he told him, no, go back and we will protect you. Here is a hadith that contradicts with the Prophet married me when I was 9, because nobody disagrees that he married her in the first year of the migration to Medina, which is year 13 of his message, peace be upon him. He got the message from the angel 13 years after, or 13 years after he migrated to Medina. He married her in the first year of Medina. Nobody disputes that fact. So for her to be 9, this means that she was born when in the 4th year of the message. 4 plus 9 is 13. The migration to Abyssinia was in year 4. She is saying that I have seen my dad trying to migrate, and then he came back in the year 4. Another hadith, also in Bukhari, in which she says, نزلت سيهزم الجمع ويولون الدبر وأنا جارية ألعب في مكة. The verse in Surah Al-Qamar that says they will be defeated, about the people of Mecca, they will be defeated, was revealed while I was a jariya, a young girl. Jariya in Arabic means a girl between 6 and 13. This verse was revealed when I was a jariyatun al'ab. I was playing as a young girl in Mecca, when God revealed they will be defeated, the people of Mecca. Now, when this verse was revealed, go to Ibn Abbas and many others. There are many opinions on when the verse was revealed, but it was revealed somewhere between year 2 and year 4 of the message. So she is saying, I was between 6 and 13 in Bukhari when the verse was revealed in Mecca. Now, how can she be between 6 and 13? How can be jariyatun al'ab? I was a young girl playing in Mecca when this verse was revealed. How can she be a young girl playing in Mecca and the verse was revealed in year 4, the latest, and she was born in year 4, so that she marries him when she was 9? Take the difference between her and her sister, Asma. Now it's not Bukhari, but many authentic narrations about Asma. When did Asma die? Asma died in the year 72 of Hijrah, which is the year 72 of Hijrah, which is plus 13, would be 85 from the start of the message. 72 of Hijrah. She died at the age of 100. Asma, nobody disputes that she was 99 or 100 when she died. And she died in year 72. It's very well known because her son Abdullah ibn Zubayr occupied the Kaaba, and you know the history, and Hajjaj of Iraq went and he killed him and he destroyed the Kaaba, and then they rebuilt it, and all of that story. Nasty story. And then she died after Abdullah by 2 weeks, right? In the year 72 at the age of 100, which means at year 0 or year 1, when the Prophet ﷺ supposed have to marry Aisha, she was 27, right? Because 28, 27, 28. She died at the year 72 at the age of 100, right? Therefore, at year 0 or year 1, she was 27, 28. Everybody knows that Aisha was 10 years younger than Asma. Was not 20 years younger than Asma. She was 10 years younger than Asma. And that is a number of narrations. Yes, they are not Bukhari again, but they contradict with Bukhari in that sense. And they are authentic in terms of hadith. And therefore, if you calculate the difference between her age and Asma's age as 10 years, according to authentic narrations, and she was 27 when the message was revealed, this means that she was 17 or 18, not 9, when she married the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now, take another, I could go on for like 10 different contradictions in Bukhari. But you will find that the scholars insisted that because she talked about herself, supposedly, in that hadith, that he married me when I was 9, therefore this is more authentic than the other times when she talked about dates of revelation of verses. To me, this is not about who's talking about themselves versus who's talking about others. To me, this is numbers. This is mathematics. You know, I did a little bit of mathematics in my academic journey, and it doesn't even take much mathematics to know that this is contradiction here, right? So somebody is wrong. Whether in Bukhari, the narrator who said that she was 9, or that she said that she was 9 when she married him, or the other narrator who said, or the 3 others, or 4, if you take all the different narrations, many of them, in which, take in Bukhari, the narration in which she participated in the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud was in year 2. Everybody knows. There's no dispute about this. So she married him in year 1 at the age of 9, supposedly, and in year 2 at the age of 10, she participated in Uhud. And then the hadith of Bukhari about her participation, she carried the water for the soldiers, and she was part of the battle. Yes, she didn't carry a sword, but she carried the water for the soldiers, and she would pour the water in their mouths. And hadith of Bukhari, where the mashayikh would know the hadith very well. So here is Bukhari contradicting himself. You want to tell me that she was 10 and she was fighting in Uhud? The Prophet ﷺ never allowed anybody under 15 to participate in a battle. In the same battle of Uhud, he refused for Abdullah ibn Umar and many others to participate until they became 15. In Bukhari too. So if you want to take the Sunnah, and again, please don't say that Jaser is saying Bukhari is da'if. No, in this hadith is da'if. But otherwise, Bukhari is one of the greatest books of Islam. It's a great collection. But there are contradictions in Bukhari in a few ahadith. That's one of them. You will find that the scholars, many of them, insisted on the hadith of 9. Many of them didn't, by the way. Many of them took the narration of Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, the narrator of Sirah, who died before Bukhari was born. And before we started to have authentic versus non-authentic and sahih and da'if. Muhammad ibn Ishaq died before any of this language was a language of Islam. So we can't apply the sahih and da'if, the authentic and weak, on Ibn Ishaq. And Ibn Ishaq was a student of Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn and Anas. And he was a student of the companions. And in the early times, in the previous century, Ibn Ishaq said that Aisha and Asma converted to Islam with their father. Abu Bakr. When Abu Bakr converted to Islam, and that's year one, obviously. That's year one, according to everybody. Abu Bakr, when Muhammad ﷺ got the message, and after Khadija, his wife, believed in him, Abu Bakr, his friend, believed in him. He went to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr took the message home, as Ibn Ishaq is saying, and he sat with his daughters and his wife, Ruman, Asma and Aisha's mother, and they talked, he is saying, and all of them converted to Islam. Aisha decided to embrace Islam, and she was small at that time. So according to these calculations, yes, she was 7 or 8 in the beginning of Islam. So by the time she married him, she was around 18 in that sense. Why am I getting into a lot of technical details here? Because I want to show you an example of a sunnah or a hadith in which we're not, I don't have a critique on the hadith from my rationality or American law or any of that. I don't care about all of this. I'm talking about Bukhari versus Bukhari. How can you reconcile that the hadith of he married me when I was 9 contradicts with 5 other hadith in Bukhari himself, let alone many others outside? And how can the other ones, all of them, imply an age of 17 or 18 or 20, somewhere in those 3 years, and the hadith of Bukhari only insists on 9? And that is a way of correcting some of the narrations that are widespread because they appeared in some authentic collections. One of them went wrong. I believe that Urwa ibn Hisham, and I don't want to get you into too many technical details, forgive me for that, I'll get to your answer. I believe that the narrator who's called Urwa ibn Hisham, a tabi'i, is the problem here, not Aisha. Aisha didn't say 9. And Urwa, he was part of the conflict between Muawiyah and Ali during the time. And then he started to narrate a hadith about Aisha and about others that were unacceptable because he was part of the other army during that conflict. To the extent that many of the hadith collectors, the major ones, actually made Urwa, Hisham ibn Urwa, ضعيف, made him unauthentic, untrustworthy. Bukhari didn't agree with their opinion on that particular person. And there are a number of problematic hadith from Hisham ibn Urwa, necessarily, that one of them is the 9. Why is it so widespread in our fiqh that a girl could marry at the age of 9? Well, just, humanity and its deviances and so forth. It's not the hadith, and the lack of courage to, not courage, I think it's lack of integrity to really look at Bukhari. And everybody knows Bukhari. As kids, we memorized Bukhari, So how can, and I remember as a child stopped, and when how can she's fighting and she's supposed to be 10? What? Fighting? And then I passed it. Oh, that's Bukhari. Don't question him. But of course now it's obvious to me that there is a contradiction. And when I went to the different narrators and I found Urwa ibn Hisham, I realized that there is a problem here. Most of the scholars I know of wouldn't be able to give you this critique of one hadith in the Sunnah, because they don't want to. They feel that they are giving in on what Islam is about. If you look at the Quran, which is a totally different story, the Quran is talking about marriage as love and mercy. Love and mercy at the age of 9. What is that? And as children, and فَجَعَلَهُ نَسَبًا وَصِهْرًا وَكَانَ رَبُّكَ قَدِيرًا, the objectives of the marriage, about having children and having in-laws at the age of 9. Well, how does this work? And then you find apologetics who say, oh no, the genetics of Arabs changed a lot since the time. So 14 years ago, a 9-year-old was supposed to be like no, that is not, has no evidence scientifically. Oh, but the Ottomans and the Abbasides and whatever, they married those Europeans whom they captive. Yes, but the history is full of garbage, and I think that's one of the reasons some of the scholars justified that marriage, because after the Umayyads and after the companions, really, it became corrupt. The politics became corrupt. and many of the leaders became immoral. As simple as that. They killed the opposition. They married these girls. But it's not an evidence. The evidence is the hadith. So I'm sorry for the very long answer, but I'm just giving an example on how this understanding of the objectives is not just in a different way. It's really, it suggests major revisions. And it's not going to be easy to move forward with that kind of thinking. But I think that kind of thinking is necessary. And it's impossible to deal, and as a person who deals with Islamic law and teaches it, it's impossible to move forward without making some courageous revisions to some hadith in Bukhari and some opinions of these guys who are the imams, the great imams of our history. It's very important. Yes, sorry.
Okay. Great explanation, and thanks for all the knowledge. I think one of the questions that I consistently hear in my interactions with my non-Muslim friends, etc., is how do you reconcile Sharia versus the constitution of a country that you're living in? Can you shed some light on, you have to follow the constitution or you have to follow Sharia? Is there controversies between them, or is one a subset of the other?
Well, the Constitution is a different story. When you talk about the Constitution, you're talking about a state.
Yeah, state, yeah.
And a state has founding documents that founds the state, its borders, its people, the system of governance, the relationship between the governed and the governor, etc. It's a different story from the Sharia. The Sharia is the divine way that is revealed to Muhammad. They are not. They are very different things. Could there be an input to a constitution or a Bill of Rights or something like that from the Sharia? Of course, because every moral system and every ethical system that you have in a society impacts the making of a certain country. So yes, discussing or researching the relationship between the founding documents and the principles of the Sharia is a very interesting research, but you don't have to choose between either. The law of the land, I don't think, as far as I know, the law of the land doesn't force you to do something wrong. It might allow wrong things. So the law of the land in this country allows intoxicants to be drank, alcohol, right? Alcohol is illegal is haram, right? So the law is never going to force you to drink alcohol. The law is just allowing alcohol to the other people. Are we against that law? Yes. As a Muslim, I live in Canada. I'm against the law that allows alcohol. People tell you, oh, you want to ban alcohol in Canada? Yes, I want. It will never happen. Well, unless the rest of Canadians really agree that we should ban alcohol, and it happened in the States at some point. Well, fine, sure. If people agree to ban something that I view is unlawful, that's great. But I cannot control the rest of the masses. And the law is not equal to Sharia in that sense. I believe in the Sharia, you see, but if the law is what if the law is going to force me to do something? I was asked a question the other day, because I do marriages sometimes in Canada and all that. I was asked whether if the law is going to force me to conduct a gay marriage. And I said, I'm not going to obey the law. What are you going to tell the people? I'm not going to tell them anything hurtful. And to me, they are sinners, and dealing with sin is with mercy. So, well, guys, thank you very much. I cannot conduct this marriage. You can go to whatever, to the city, or I don't know, a different mosque, whatever. I can. What if the law forces me? No, I will not do it. And I think that liberal democracies will have to have enough space for me to do that. I mean, to refuse to give my service. I'm not discriminating against anybody or harming anybody, but I have the freedom to serve somebody or not to serve somebody. A different case when I'm obliged to, which is, I'm sure my brother Dr. Ibrahim will talk about it. When he was a governor, he had to deal with the same question, but he was a governor for everybody. I conduct marriage for Muslims. And therefore, my opinion as an expert in Islamic jurisprudence is that this marriage is invalid in Islam. I cannot, because we say, well, I marry you based on the Book of Allah and the tradition of His Messenger. The Book of Allah doesn't allow that marriage to happen. That, as simple as that. If I say otherwise, I don't understand the Book of Allah, because it's not a Bukhari narration. This is very, I mean, this is well known in Islam and every other religion for that matter. So if the law is going to force me, then I have to get into what you could call civil disobedience or something, because no, or I leave. خلاص, يعني I can't. If I have to kill somebody or I leave. The land of Allah is vast, and find some country to give me another, I don't know, passport. So I hope this answers the question. Yes, please, my brother and then my brother.
Just a connected question with what Brother Fadi said. Thank you, Jazakallah khair for
I'll be brief, inshallah, and can take
what I have read, that, like even the Declaration of Independence that says life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Sure.
These are the principles of Sharia as well. And the Khutbah al-Wada, Prophet Muhammad talked about this. And there are two other things he mentioned, which was the honor, and I forgot the fifth one. And then there's a Christian professor, his name is John McDeasy, and he's written a paper on Sharia and the sources of Sharia on the English common law, which what we follow in this country. He talked about the trial by jury is a practice with, that Sharia promoted, and then rules of evidence, dismissal of hearsay, the trust. I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, so he's not a Muslim, but he writes about it. So I don't see those as being disconnected. I think a lot of the founding fathers were familiar with the Islamic principles. Thomas Jefferson had the Quran, right? So I think, is it reasonable to think that there's connection there and similar principles?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, in a sense of you feeling not alien to the founding documents and the founding principles of this society. Yeah. And I think that this is true and very important, that we feel as people who live here as citizens, we feel that we are not alien to the principles that founded this country. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Okay, this is very Islamic, and this is good, and alhamdulillah, but also know, if you are going to say that this is Islamic and nothing else is Islamic, which is what some people say, or if your liking of the good in the system will not allow you to critique the system, and that is very important. So democracy, is democracy Islamic? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it's trying to achieve it's a system that's trying to achieve justice in a certain way, and participation and representation and so forth. So as far as it fulfills the higher objectives and the principles, it is Islamic. But no, not everything that democracy produces is necessarily Islamic. And we live in one of those instances now, these days here, that there are defaults, how do you say it in English? There are deficiencies in democracy, and these deficiencies, if we are not aware of what Islam is about, we will not be able to contribute to correcting democracy into a better democracy. You see, can you correct democracy? Yes, you can, because every human system, that's why in the beginning of the lecture I started with that there is a Quranic worldview and there are human systems. And the human systems will always remain deficient from the Quranic worldview, because the Quranic worldview is about these principles of participation and consultation and shura. So democracy is good as much as it serves these higher principles. But could we in 100 years have a different system that is better than democracy? Yes, we might. It's not the end of history. I know that some people propose for political reasons. Is it better than dictatorship? Yes, of course, it is. Dictatorship is further than Islam, further from Islam than democracy. But they are both human systems. So any constitution or any Bill of Rights or any Charter of Human Rights or any of that, this is all good. But I don't think we should be apologetic in the sense that, well, this Charter of Human Rights is what Islam is about, and we called for this 1,000 years ago, and Omar did this and that. That kind of talk is good for public consumption, and it is good for us to feel familiar with the issues, with what humanity reaches. But they are not the interpretation of Islam, because to me, Islam as a moral system will always remain ahead of any human systems, especially systems we develop as Muslims. So when this comes from somebody who lives under a tyranny, and then they start to criticize democracy and criticize Europe and this, and that becomes quite ironic, because they live under a tribal tyranny that belongs to some century, a millennium ago, and they are criticizing French democracy or no, that is not right, you see. But if they criticize their tyrants and French democracy, then they can do that. I don't know where they will travel, but that's fine.
But Jaser,
Sure.
Dr. Jaser, I just think it's very useful.
Sure.
To share with this audience the experiment you were part of, using the Maqasid to determine, for example, the Islamicity of various societies, such as the organization of the Islamic Conference, because I don't think that we want to represent national constitutions, not even the South African one, as the expression of Sharia in South Africa. That would be a stretch, because I think if you look at that sketch there, the Sharia is not even everything that the Prophet ﷺ had said. The Qanun is outside of that divine, but it is in many cases an interpretation of it, and in some cases would fall short of it. But I think that is one, and I think that it's also useful for you to share other distinctions, such as, for example, crime and sin.
Yeah.
But I just thought that would help us a lot in our discussion.
Well, exactly.
It's only because I've seen parts of this movie.
No, thank you. This is, perhaps this would, inshallah, complete my answer. That I was part of a project that asked, how can we judge the Islamicity of a state? How can we say that a state is Islamic? And that project was supposed to be implemented in the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference at that time, now the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And it was funded in Malaysia by the Malaysian government, and some organizations, American and others, were involved. Lots of details, but basically I went to Malaysia a number of times to come up with this index of Islamic. How do we say that a state is Islamic? We came up with a number of theories. One of them has to do with the character of the leader. So we say that the state is Islamic if the leader is going to follow certain Islamic ethics and so forth. But then we criticized ourselves that a Muslim leader could be much worse than a non-Muslim leader from the Islamic perspective. And at that time, that was some time ago, we lived in the era of Bin Ali and Mubarak and all of these people. Some of them are still in charge. But basically we said that no, I mean, we can't really say that Tunis is an Islamic state because Bin Ali is Muslim. And he is one of the worst tyrants in the world, even though his country is a small country, let alone Mubarak and all of these people. So we went to, okay, let's make the leader a scholar, Wilayat al-Faqih, and there were other, Iranian brothers as well, and it was a big committee. And they suggested that if the leader is a faqih, like Khomeini or others, therefore it becomes an Islamic state, because the wilaya the wilaya in the Farsi, would be for the faqih. But then we realized that the faqih is not qualified politically. We're not really talking about Abu Bakr or Umar. We are talking about a sheikh or a mullah or somebody, Maulana. Maulana doesn't understand how to run a state. And therefore, even our Shia brothers, and especially the schools of the Shia in Lebanon and the Arab Shia more than the Farsi Shia, are more into revising the theory of the Wilayat al-Faqih, of that the Faqih is the head of the state kind of thing, even though in Iran it's obviously what Khomeini convinced them to do. So now we went ahead by saying that, well, the constitution has to be Islamic. So Pakistan says in the constitution that the sovereignty is for God and Muhammad is his messenger and that Pakistan is an Islamic state, etc. But then we thought that perhaps Pakistan is not the best example of an Islamic state, with all due respect here, or Egypt for that matter, or any of these countries that say that Sharia is the source of legislation. Well, it was a source of legislation before Sadat, and then Sadat wanted to go right a little bit, as politicians do when they want to gain some votes or whatever, some public support. So he added the. So Sharia is the source of legislation. Oh, okay. So, but it doesn't mean, if the constitution says that, it doesn't mean that the country is Islamic. We want to measure the Islamicity of the country so that we give policy recommendations. Basically, that was the objective. So that people in different countries, governments in different countries, have better policies that are closer to Islam. The indices that we have so far are, the World Bank Index and the Freedom House, and the best is the Human Development Index of the UN, etc. And all of that is not exactly what Islam is saying as a system of governance. So this was the exercise. We ended up deciding that Maqasid al-Sharia, or the objectives of the Islamic jurisprudence, would be the best way to measure the Islamicity of the state, by measuring how much the state contributes to Maqasid. The objectives of the Sharia, how much are they achieved in a state? And the state that achieves the objectives of the Sharia the most is the most Islamic state. And then the OIC project says that, well, some countries are observers in the OIC, India, for example, and so forth. And some other countries have big Muslim minorities, and in the West, and so on. So let us include in our studies some Muslim minority countries in addition to the Muslim majority countries. So we ended up including some, 70 countries, in addition to 53, I guess, of the Islamic Convention. And then when we crunched the numbers based on measuring the levels of justice and the preservation of mind and wealth and faith and belief, yes, and places of worship, and it was a long story with hundreds of parameters and so forth, and it was an expensive project. We ended up making a pilot study. The pilot study put the Scandinavian countries and Canada at the top of the Islamic states chart. And when we looked at rights, we didn't call it human rights because this is a Western concept. Okay, let's look at rights. حقوق الآدميين. In fact, we have something called the rights of the humans in the capacity of them being humans. We have that in fiqh, حقوق الآدميين. We put حقوق الآدميين from the Hanafi fiqh and so on. We try to measure. We find that at the bottom of the countries in حقوق الآدميين is good old Pakistan, good old Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and so forth. The countries who own Islam. Now, as a member of that committee, I have a criticism for the methodology we followed. Because I think we did what my brother was saying, in a sense that we were apologetic for certain measurements that are purely Western criteria of measuring a good life. To the extent that I gave a presentation once in Gallup Foundation in Washington on that project during that time, and the friends in Gallup asked me to consult me on their well-being index, because they said that this is very similar to our well-being index, what we're talking about. My criticism is that there are elements of faith that a state, if the state is going to be a state of the Islamic, if it's going to be Islamic State, not the gang. No, I'm not talking about the gang. I'm talking about Islamic State as a concept. The gang aside and its complexity, if you're talking about Islamic State as a concept, a state has to guard the values of its people. And the values in America, for example, or in Europe, could intersect a lot with the Islamic values, but they are not the same. That is the critique I have now. Like, yeah, I guess I'm getting older and getting more radical, I'm not sure, but I guess, because you really can't say that the definition of justice in the American sense is the Islamic definition of justice, or the divine. I don't care about the Islamic as in Muslims. Muslim definition of justice is ridiculous. As in Muslim countries, if you want to go to these countries that came at the bottom of our index, if you go to Egypt or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or any of these countries, that definition of justice is nonsense from the Islamic point of view too, as well. And that, unfortunately, now is law, and this as well. They protect their definitions of justice with the law and so forth. And they justify tyranny with the law. Other than that, the American definition of justice, even if you want to look at it, we have to not to lose our critical faculties when we deal with issues of justice. So we can't say that, yes, because America, according to that index, that was very similar to the Human Development Index at the end, America scores, 70%, and Egypt scores 50%, then America is more Islamic than Egypt. This is not, to me, not academically sound, because you are comparing two different ways of looking at justice that are both short of what God, in my perspective, wants from us in terms of justice. And I think that we need to revise. If I have a chance, and I meet sometimes with some of the scholars who developed that index, the way it went on in Malaysia as well. I was in Malaysia a couple of months ago, and the government now, after that's when the project ended, by the way. But when Saudi Arabia and Malaysia and they went in the bottom, and we found good old Norway and Denmark and Canada and all that in the top, and America was like number 15 in the Islamic, and then some Gulfian countries, the smaller ones, because of their health and because citizens only were considered. If you consider migrant workers, Qatar and Saudi Arabia would be in trouble, but because we didn't consider migrant workers, etc., etc. So. But when we had this pilot study, the funding stopped because they said, well, this is nonsense. You're going to make Denmark the top of the Islamic index. But I think if we go back now, I think I would, and some of them passed away, and Allah bless their souls. If I have the chance to revive this project, when I was in Malaysia, I tried to propose that. The government now didn't want to revise the project. The government took it into one of its offices, and they produce a yearly figure about Malaysia only. The last figure from last year was that Malaysia is 80% compliant with the Sharia. They called it the state compliance with the Sharia. And you can see how political this is, especially given now, the Prime Minister and the issues in Malaysia and all of the, you can look at the news and see the student demonstrations in the streets of Kuala Lumpur today because of the Prime Minister and the allegations. So when you say that Malaysia now is 80% compliant, and then another Arab country, what's that, Saudi Arabia, I think, said, no, we're 90% compliant, it becomes a joke. And so just.
So my question was, I think to deep dive on the concept of justice. Right. So you said justice is effectively the foundation of all of our analysis. But the idea of justice itself is not immutable.
No.
If we take the example of slavery, right? The slavery was allowed at the time of the Prophet. Slavery was allowed at when the Constitution was written. The founding fathers held slaves. So our concept of slavery as a justified cause has shifted from the time of the Prophet to now, from the time of the foundation of the country to now.
Yes.
So if the concept of justice itself is flexible and changing, then isn't our base itself then immutable?
Well, Jazakallah khair, that's a very good question. I think that there are fixed parts of justice and there are variable parts as a concept. Reading the Quran, you can see that one of the elements of justice, for example, is the equality of human beings in their basic dignity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have dignified the children of Adam. That is part of the Islamic view of justice, that nobody is better than anybody except with piety and good deeds, and so forth. Empowering the weak is part of justice, and therefore Allah in the Quran is asking the person in debt to write the contract, is asking the mother, Allah bless you, is asking the mother to be supported in order to take care of the children, is asking, and so forth. So always giving advantage to the weaker side and the more vulnerable side. But there are practices of justice that evolve with history. One of them is slavery. My view on slavery is different. Your view is the majority of people's views, that, well, the Prophet ﷺ dealt with slavery as a status quo, and Islam was supposed to develop in order to continue with slavery until the Americans abolished slavery, and then we say, Alhamdulillah, the Americans abolished slavery. Allah bless you. That is the mainstream view. My view from my reading, and this is a view of a few scholars, but it's not the mainstream view, that slavery ended by the end of the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. If you read in the Quran again about the captives of war, who were the source of slavery. Sources of slavery were two things: the captives of war and the inheritance of slavery. You inherit somebody's slave. They inherit slaves until today. Saudi Arabia, for example, they still have slaves, for those who don't know, and they inherit slaves. So somebody dies, they inherit. Those are the two sources. The Quran is saying about the captives of war, فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً. The latter verses of the Quran. The earlier verses is not saying capture them, but it says if you have captives of war, you either take ransom and free them, or you free them with a goodwill. فَإِمَّا مَنًّا بَعْدُ وَإِمَّا فِدَاءً. And that's why the Prophet, towards the end of his life, peace be upon him, he did not enslave anybody anymore. Towards the end of his life, he took a tax from the conquered lands in the battles and so on towards the end of his life. And it was not slavery anymore. During the time of Abu Bakr, there was no slavery. During the wars of Hurub al-Ridda, of the apostasy wars and all that, when the Arabs wanted to conquer Medina, and the Medina went out and established a state, they did not enslave anybody, and they did not allow Khalid and others to enslave the leaders of the army of the time. During the time of Umar, he did not enslave anybody. And in fact, the question was a debate that they have. If you read Abu Yusuf in Al-Kharaj, or you read any of the history books that dealt with the time of Umar in details, you will see that Umar had a debate with the rest of the companions who wanted to enslave the people of Damascus and Baghdad and Cairo of the time, because they are now slaves. They are now part of the Islamic establishment. And as the Prophet did in the early days, let us divide the land and the people. And he told them, no, we are now opening or conquering larger cities. لا أقسم عليكم المدن العظام. He is saying, we are opening these major cities. I'm not going to divide the people or the land. And the companions during the time of Umar differed. They ended up with a decision that they are going to take taxes as they take zakah from Muslims, or jizya in that sense. So they take the charity, the annual charity, the zakah from Muslims, and they take taxes or jizya from non-Muslims in that sense. And normally the jizya, by the way, is less than the charity that Muslims pay in the different opinions, etc. So Omar, during his time, stopped that. Uthman did not know to carry slaves. Slavery went back, in my understanding, during the time of the Umayyads. The Umayyads, when they converted the Khilafah into a kingdom, they started to go out and take slaves from the Turks and from the Indians, etc. And they revived slavery. But slavery during the time of the Prophet for decades was not practiced in the sense of enslaving captures of war. The other source of slavery that has to do with the inheritance of slavery was also stopped towards the end of the Prophet's life. There is a hadith, and now in Bukhari, but scholars don't take it, I don't know why, in which he ﷺ forbade the selling of the mothers, the slave mothers, ummahat al-awlad, and which means that the Prophet towards the end of his life, he said that no more new slaves from wars, and if the slave wants to get freed, then help the slave until he pays his price and gets freed, al-kitaba, right? And he ﷺ about fakku raqaba and so forth, he explained from the times of Mecca, but especially in Medina, that slaves are supposed to go and do mukataba. Mukataba is to tell the masters, I'm going to pay you for what you paid and I'm free. And there was a movement for doing that. And if the girl especially gets pregnant, then she becomes free. She becomes walad. She becomes a mother of a child. And he freed the mothers of the child, of the children, in the sense that they are not to be sold, they are not to be inherited. Until today, in Saudi Arabia and in Mauritania, until 2008, the slaves were inherited by basically somebody dying, and the slaves, he forbade that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar, again, argued with the rest of the companions, and most of them went against him in that. He told them no, but the Prophet forbade the selling of the mother slaves. And basically, if a girl gets pregnant from slavery, then she's free. And they went against him. So during the time of his time, he implemented that. But again, with the Umayyads, they started to so my reading of the slavery, which is nowhere in the Quran, yes, is telling us to deal with slaves in a certain way, and to deal with slavery in terms of girls or women as marriage. These are also opinions that are everywhere, that slavery that Islam came to inherit from the practice of humanity is dealing with it as a reality. And yes, the Prophet ﷺ did not abolish slavery in one night, but towards the end of his life it was practically abolished, to my understanding, because there was no more captives of war to be enslaved. In fact, Umar said, متى استعبدتم الناس وقد ولدتهم أمهاتهم أحرارا. Umar said, when people are born free, you cannot enslave them. And some people are saying that he was narrating what the Prophet said, peace be upon him. Why don't we know this for a fact? Humanity, that's again the difference between fiqh and sharia. That's the difference between something that to me is clear in the sharia, that people are not supposed to be enslaved, and something that fiqh developed, especially with the Umayyads, especially when the tribe of Umayyah decided to make the Khilafah, or the leadership of the time, decided to make the kingdom in the Roman sense. Hereditary. And then we had the likes of Yazid and others who were, all their advantage is that they were the sons of the previous Khalifa. They had no value in Islam. And so forth, and when the grandson of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Hussein, tried to revolt against the Umayyads, they killed him. And when Abdullah ibn Zubayr, the other son of the other grandson of Abu Bakr, the son of Asma bint Abi Bakr, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, his aunt is Aisha, the Prophet's wife. When Abdullah ibn Zubayr wanted to revolt against the Umayyads, and what they did, the Umayyads killed him and crucified him. They crucified Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and they killed al-Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, when he said that no, Islam is not supposed to be a kingdom, it's supposed to be a khilafah, in the sense of people choosing. People chose my father, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and people have to choose. And even if they chose Muawiyah, they didn't choose his son, Yazid, at the time. But they killed al-Hussein, and they brought his head to Damascus, and eventually put his head in Cairo, where he is buried now, and the body is in Iraq, of course, and so on. And Muslims were divided into Sunnah and Shia, and the rest of the history has nothing to do with what Islam is about. And I think that one of the biggest deviations that we had as Muslims in our history is the Khilafah of the Umayyads. Even though Muawiyah, the companion, had a view that he expressed, if you read Ibn Khaldun, he is the most balanced, really, and he tried to represent the opinions of the Umayyads and why did they make it a kingdom. He is saying that Muawiyah thought that too much killing and too much instability. But he said, if we make it a kingdom in the Roman sense, and we put this tribe of the Arabs, the Umayyads, as the head of the Arabs, everybody will listen. It worked, but it produced a tyranny that we still suffer from until today. We still live in the Umayyads' time until today. Republics or monarchies, the same way. And I think that slavery was a byproduct of the corruption that happened in the political system. But the companions, the four caliphs who came after the Prophet ﷺ, didn't enslave anybody, and took the opinions or took the norms of the end period of the Prophet's life for people not to be enslaved. It's unlawful to enslave people. But of course, the fuqaha afterwards, some of them, served the interests of the sultans of the time and the caliphs of the time by allowing slavery and allowing the slave girls to be even at the age of 9, and all of that based on these narrations and these opinions that to me are wrong. But we find it in fiqh. And still, the fuqaha until today are allowing all of this. The kings and the princes of the Arab world until today have slaves. Still, the king of Morocco was known. The Hassan, not Muhammad Sank, his father, was known to have slaves, and he came to Saudi Arabia as you know, in was it the 70s, or with an aeroplane full of slave girls when he came there, because for him his fuqaha gave him fatwas that he could have slave girls in the 20th century, and I think that this is wrong, and this is not Islam. You see, so
can I just interrupt? Because I see something that we may have to start over again. The register that you're filling in, you can't just write Riyadh. You should write your name as you would want to have it appear on the certificate. And the certificate is underwritten by the institution at which Dr. Jaser Auda is the Al-Shatibi Chair of Maqasid Studies, and it will attest to the fact that you have participated in this. So the register, please write clearly and write as you want. It's not just to say, Labbaik, I'm here. So that's what it really is.
The International Peace
And I think
College.
that there's a sister on the far left.
Yeah, excuse me, yes. We'll take the far left and then our sister, because we...
So I would just like to bring up the point. I mean, I think that it's good that we're going into discussions as to why, this is bad or this is good, but I think it boils down to the fundamental question that a lot of non-Muslims are worried when they see our Sharia law, and what the media portrays is that Muslims want there to be Sharia law. Being a person from like a Muslim minority sort of situation, I think it's the same thing. Muslims and non-Muslims alike, we wouldn't want a way of life to be imposed on us. And I think that it's important because in my limited understanding, Sharia is knowing God through the Quran, knowing the Sunnah through the life of Prophet Muhammad, and trying to be our best selves.
Yeah.
And so the questions of like slavery and things like that, we already know are non-starters. I mean, it's obvious that it's not a good thing. So why do we have to have such long conversations? Why not go back to those principles that you spoke about, those four sort of like fundamentals, and sort of like dissect and try and understand exactly what it is we should be as good Muslims and the best examples of what we should be.
Sure. Jazakallah khair. I agree. Thank you for the advice. I totally agree that these discussions are more academic than anything else, and they're perhaps relevant in other situations other than your situation. My answer to this Sharia law question is that Sharia is not a law. There is nothing in the Islamic knowledge or in the Arabic language that is called Islamic law. Islamic law is in what? Qanun Islami. There is nothing called Qanun Islami. There is Sharia and there is fiqh and there is Qanun. Sharia is the way. Fiqh is the understanding of the way. The Qanun is the law of the land. The Qanun could be inspired by the Sharia, could be inspired by other systems of value and other bills and other principles. So your answer here in America, that Sharia is not Islamic law, Sharia is Islamic ethics. And there is nothing really, you can tell them, I attended a course with a scholar of Islamic jurisprudence, he said that there's nothing called Islamic law in Islam. The law means the law of the land, Qanun. Qanun is the law of the land. So Sharia is Islamic ethics, and every system of ethics influences the law in a sense that we, and you can explain to our American friends here that in terms of ethics we are quite conservative when it comes to ethics. We have nuances in our stances on abortion and on marriage and a number of things, but we are mostly conservative when it comes to these things. So you can say that in terms of the Islamic ethics, there are issues that because of my ethics, I have an opinion about the law. So I am anti-abortion, you can say. I don't know if you take the opinion of the 3 months or not or whatever, but even if you take the opinion of the total anti-abortion, you can say I am, for example, because of my ethics, anti-abortion. Because of my ethics, I'm anti-war, and so forth. But Sharia is not law. Sharia is ethics. And a sin in Islam is not a crime. There is a difference in Islam between a sin and a crime. In Islam, in the Quran talks about all sorts of sins, but it doesn't make them a crime that are punishable unless the sin affects what the fuqaha call the public good or the public order, to use a modern language. So adultery is a sin, but it's not a crime until adultery is seen by 4 people in a public place, etc. Like there is certain understanding of how a sin could become a crime. But Sharia is not a law. Sharia is an ethical system. When it comes to the family law, which is many of the cases of Sharia, what I say in Canada, and some of our brothers did not like what I have to say, when they proposed a Sharia court in Canada for Muslim marriages and all of that, I personally opposed it. And I thought that the Canadian law, as it is closer to Islam than the Hanafi fiqh. And I'm not saying this allegorically. I mean what I'm saying. And neither of them represents what I understand as the Islamic spirit of the family law. But the Hanafi fiqh that was proposed at that time for the Sharia court in Canada was a group of brothers from the India-Pakistan part of the Islamic world, and therefore they proposed the typical Hanafi opinions. For example, doesn't give women divorce rights. For example, in matters of custody and all of that, is very unfair to women. For example, doesn't give women after a divorce rights more than 3 months in the way that is stated in the fiqh. Or if he is going to support her, then he gives her 1 dress in the winter and 1 dress in the summer, and he gives her, 2 meals every day. And what is stated in the Bedouin fiqh of 1,000 years ago, and they want to apply it in Canada. And I thought that the Canadian principles, even though Canada in terms of family law is different from the Islamic law in a number of ways that we all know, but when it comes to issues of justice, at least it gives women divorce rights. Yes, it gives them a period of separation of 1 year versus the Islamic law that makes the separation period 4 months, as in the Quran. It's 4 months in the Quran as a separation period. In Canada, it's 1 year, sure. But at least it gives women divorce rights. And when there is a divorce, especially after a long marriage, it does a division of assets, or it does equalize the assets. There is no opinion in the Islamic law of the equalization of assets except in the Maliki fiqh. And therefore it's law in Morocco, in the new Mudawwana. In Morocco, they divide the assets. If the marriage was long enough for the man to become a millionaire, he cannot just go the next morning to marry a younger girl as a millionaire and then she goes and beg in the street. That's what every other school of fiqh other than this Maliki opinion says. But the other schools of fiqh are not meeting the requirements of justice in this way. And therefore, the Canadian law, when it judges that custody matters go with the best interest of the child, and settlements in issues of divorce and so on goes with the general principle of fairness, that is closer to the Islamic law. So the rest of your answer could be that, well, the American law is fine with me. Yes, there could be improvements in some places, and we are not unaware of how the law is used in corruptive ways. You should be aware of that, especially if you're a student of law. But on the other hand, yes, I'm fine with it. Well, that's what I say in Canada. Canadian law, including in the family law, is good enough for me as a law of the land, and I obey it and I go by it. I disagree with drinking alcohol or gay marriage on a religious perspective, but I know it's a right of the other citizens. I don't mind. But on the other hand, I think that the conversion of the Sharia into law in our country here has to go through what we call ijtihad, or rethinking, or reasoning. And Sharia to me is an ethical system that I practice on myself and my family and so forth, but that has no implication on the law. Of course, there are many issues that we could get into.
Can I just
sure.
Because I think that the sister is right. We know exactly what it is. I think that we are like fish in water who don't know that we are in water, because we pray and we dress in a particular way, we eat the kind of things, and so Sharia for us is as natural as the water that a fish swims in. And so those of us who are pro-Sharia, to use your sketch here, I think we have that understanding. I think that we are dealing with two things. I think we're dealing here with a perception about Sharia that is formed in some cases through a mischievous lens, but is taken from real practices that constitute the global understanding of Sharia. So our duty is not simply to live it and say, let's get on. Our duty is to salvage it. It's to reappropriate it and to take it back from those who have created a lot of the points of distortion. Slavery would have been buried. All of us here who have slaves. But ISIS has slaves. And who has come out to say to ISIS, it is haram? And who has come out to give ISIS the explanation that you have gotten about slavery from Dr. Auda? So, not only are there distorted lenses, there is a closed mouth, a silence, which then says that the sound from perpetrators pass right through here into that one that creates the fear, that creates the 82 states that make this law. There may be a point of mischief, but there is an origin that we have a responsibility And so every tyrant, when they want to win an election, they say, hudud, Islamic punishment is coming back. We're flogging this, we're cutting the hand of the thief, we're hanging the murderer, and we're stoning the adulterer. And this is done visibly. And the rest of us who believe we are disabled from speaking about Sharia and fiqh and all of those kind of things, we are the closed mouth, and we let that pass unfiltered through mischievous lenses and non-mischievous lenses to create the distortion, to create the opposition and the bad name for Sharia. And what we want to do, we want to pray in the times that we want to pray. We want to be modest in our dress. We want to be assured that the food we eat is halal. We want to be sure that when we want to get married, at the right marriageable age, not 9, when we want to get married, there is an imam who is allowed to do that, and we want our life facilitated. That's Sharia for us. But Sharia is that ISIS takes slaves. That's the public perception, because they do it more dramatically. They just capture Yazidi women, and then they issue fatwas. Fatwa number 63 of ISIS regulates the relationship between a slave owner, the sexual relationship between the slave owner and the women slaves. And it says, for example, that a man who owns both a mother and a daughter must choose whether he will have sex with a mother or whether he will have sex with a daughter. He can't have sex with both. It sounds like noble. Subpoint number 2 says,
if I may as well, like just between brackets, that slavery, even when it was practiced in early Islam, before it was abolished, it was not rape. It was never rape. It was marriage. And we all know the story again in Bukhari, a Muslim, when the Prophet ﷺ had a slave, and then she refused to marry him. He gave her a gift, and he sent her to her people, and so forth. And this was his sunnah, his tradition. So it was a form of marriage in the early stage. It was abolished after. But rape is not Islamic. Rape is a crime. In Islam, they mix rape. Anyway.
So the point that I'm making is, we who have this natural understanding of Sharia as regulating our prayers and regulating our eating and regulating our dress and regulating our marriages and so forth, we have not only a duty to live it like that as simply, but we have a duty to take it back from here. We have a duty to open our mouths of interpretation and to ensure that when it gets through there, it is filtered, correct, clarified, and whoever distorts it afterwards is doing a pure act of mischief as they go. But this will not happen. It will happen when all of you understand Sharia in the way that I think that Dr. Auda has been taking us through it, in order for this anti to be removed. The fear must be removed. No one wants to come and cut off hands and do all of those kind of things. We've got to remove that. That's not our understanding. No one sees the one as replacing the other. We see it as subsets, imperfect subsets of the other, and not complete. And so I think that what we need to be able to do is to understand it that way. I don't know, Dr. Auda, I don't know if you have a slide of the 6 or 7 basic maqasid, which I think will also be very helpful, because it all derives right into 6 or 7 basic principles that I think we must know, so that we can do the wise until we come to those kind of points. But I thought I just wanted to respond to your question. We're not just asking you to live it, we're asking you to fight for its clarification and its purification.
Well, Jazakallah khair, thank you very much. And I'll go to the question, but I just want to add that the anti-voices are sometimes justified. If Islam is going to be presented as something that allows, let's say, domestic violence, like in one of the cases, I guess it was the Boston case, one of the cases in which it was a big deal about the Sharia and so on. The lawyer of the guy who abused his wife came and said that Islam allows him to abuse his wife. And the judge said, well, because his religion allows him, then it's allowed. Had this guy been a Muslim judge, abuse in front of a Muslim judge is grounds for not divorce, what's called fasq or talaq lid-darar. Basically divorce based on harm, which allows the woman to sue the ex-husband for compensation. That's the law everywhere in the Muslim majority countries. But because the American judge just said, okay, well, it's allowed in your religion, well, go ahead. That creates fear from the Sharia for everybody, including myself. Like, what is it? Sharia now is about abuse. So part of the we have to give also some understanding of the voices that are concerned about the Sharia. And when they see all of this cutting of hands and throwing people from on top of buildings and all of that, and they don't know that if they study that, this is rather symbolic, other than the building stuff. But when the Quran talks about the cutting of the hand or flogging of, this is more symbolic than anything else, because the conditions that the Quran sets are impossible conditions. It's talking about a maximum punishment or a hypothetical punishment for why aren't Muslims anywhere applying this except for Daesh and Taliban and these fringe places? I mean, Muslims anywhere are not applying these kinds of punishments because they know that this is not, it's not really the correct understanding of the Sharia today. And it's not something that you apply when you have minorities and you have other people with other, and you have a majority of Muslims who are very concerned about misapplying this. I would never vote for the application of hudud anywhere in the Muslim majority countries, because these people, we don't have Abu Bakr and Umar anymore. We have, corrupt governments and politicians. Most of them are bad. And so if Saddam and Numeri and these people, if I lived in their times, I did live in their times, I would totally oppose what they do, because they are not the most pious of leaders to observe that these are symbols rather than anything in the reality. So what I'm saying is that people have a real concern. I have a real concern that somebody wakes up in the morning in the Arab world and wants to apply the hudud, because I know that the first victims will be the scholars and so forth. The first people. I know that if they apply the hudud back in Egypt, I know that they will accuse me of apostasy, as they did with every other Egyptian scholar. Ibn Taymiyyah died in prison, and every scholar, Al-Razi and Ibn Rushd, was accused of apostasy. The scholars that I'm quoting, and that one my brother Ibrahim is going to quote for the rest of the day, all of them were accused of apostasy by their sultans. And many of them actually died in prison. Many of them were persecuted of apostasy. So we know the game, and therefore we are not going to allow something like this to happen. So the hudud part is not really, it is a real concern. And our answer is that no, these are, yes, mentioned in the Quran, but they are not something that any Muslim applies, even when the 100% of the population is Muslim. Yes, we'll take this question and then we take it.
I wish to continue this discussion about falls of silence and the relationship of religion to state.
Sure.
On the one hand, many sociologists I know will say that every state needs a religion to hold it together at a spiritual level. In this country, where it's denied that there's any established religion, in fact there is.
Yep.
And that name of that religion is Americanism. One may be a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, whatever, as long as one affirms the principles of Americanism. The problem, of course, is that this country, like every country, is bound to act in what the majority of its citizens consider their own interests, their own economic interests, their own political interests. But I, as a Christian who affirms the Catholicity, the universality of the Church, and you as a Muslim who affirms the priority of the Ummah, can't say that I affirm a state policy because it's in the interest of Americans. It has to also be considered, how does it affect the people outside, not only in war, but economically. So the problem for a growing number of Christians is that can any religion that allows itself to become the glue, the civic religion of a state, exist without corruption, that it's inherently corrupted, so that somehow we all must begin to affirm those aspects of our traditions that make it impossible for a state to claim us as their own religion, because we're always denying the boundaries that they're setting on us, saying we have to fight that war against those people because it's in our interest. We can't say that anymore. I'm just curious how you respond to that analysis.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you to a great extent. I would add that secularism or a secular approach to a state will have to develop in order to give more room to religious voices. Because I think that a secular approach so far is claiming that it's not religious, but there is religion. So instead of Americanism, why don't we have Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and whoever wants to contribute from a religious perspective to the works of the state and the institutions and the laws of the state? Because at the end, religion brings ethics on an individual level to the implementation. So if I can see my religion in the law, I will obey the law in a better way. One way to do this is through parallel legislations in some areas. Back in the Muslim majority countries, most of the countries have different family laws for different religions, Islam and others. That is one way of making people comfortable, but again, between brackets, that it has to be thought well enough, and the extreme opinions cannot dominate that kind of law. But family law would be an area where there are parallel legislations based on people's, private convictions. And in terms of the other ethical issues, I think liberalism has gone too far in today's, and I think that's part of the Trump voters' concerns. Part of them, that the country is taking liberalism too far, and for religious people it's a concern. And I think that if these people start to see some response in the law to their religious concerns, then perhaps we could have a better union as people. I'm quite concerned that the higher court, what's it called, the Constitutional Court, they sit and change the definition of family after I don't know how many thousands of years in America with a meeting, rather than a democratic process and involving the people in this country, and that decision had an impact on everywhere in the world. If everybody agrees, that's fine. They have a right, but I don't think that it passed democratic scrutiny or public scrutiny, and I think that is secularism in an extreme case, saying that religion has nothing to do with this. Because if we ask people about the definition of marriage, every religious community will bring their definition of marriage. Why not? Why shouldn't we allow religious expressions in a secular state to contribute to the state? So just to add, but I agree with what you have to say. I think we have to move post-secularism into something, yes, and we stop for